Today I'm going to show you how do I manage reports from CAL, usage logging and paper trace in Microsoft Dynamics NAV. This video demonstrates which functions in Code Unit 1 you can modify to have an impact when you run or print a report. We'll make some modifications to this code unit to enable report logging and paper tray selections. To get there, I will follow two steps. In the first step, I will introduce the getPaperTrayForReport function and explain how that works. Then in the next step, I will explain how you can modify Code Unit 1 to implement report logging. So let's get started with the first step, selecting paper trays. When you print a report, as a developer, you can decide which pages actually go to which paper trays. So you can actually decide, for example, which letterhead needs to be used depending on the page in the report itself. As a developer, you can define this in the report properties. In the report properties, you will see the paper source first page, paper source default page, and paper source last page properties. For example, in the paper source first page field, you choose the paper source. The list contains 13 standard trays and 16 printer-specific trays. The information comes from the fin.stx file. If the printer that's used for this report doesn't support the specified paper source, then the printer uses the default tray, which is specified by the printer driver. If you don't specify a value for the paper source first page property, then the printer uses the tray that's specified in the paper source default page property. If you don't specify a value for either the paper source first page or paper source default page property, then the printer uses the default printer tray, which is defined by the operating system. Now, when you print a report, at runtime, the settings that you specify in the print and page setup dialog boxes will override the value specified for the paper source property. You can also achieve this by adding the getPaperTrayForReport procedure in Code Unit 1 application management. As a developer, you have to add this procedure manually whenever you need it. And it will give you runtime control over the paper tray selection for the first, last and default pages in all reports. To do this, you go into Code Unit 1, you go into the globals and you create a new function which you actually are going to give the name getPaperTrayForReport. Then in the properties of the function, you need to make sure the ID is set to 75. Then you go into the locals of the function and define the following parameters. Report ID, first, default and last page. The last three parameters are defined as reference parameters. Then you can go into the code of this function and via programming you can decide which page needs to go to which paper tray. In this example, for report 111, the customer top 10, the first page goes to tray 1, the default page to tray 2 and the last page to tray 3. Then for report 1306, the mini sales invoice, you can define other trays for different pages. Similarly, you can apply the same procedure for different reports using different paper trays for different pages. The getPaperTrayForReport function will execute automatically when you print the report. If the getPaperTrayForReport function is absent, then the report will use the paper source first, default and last page properties. Let's go to step 2, where I'm going to modify Code Unit 1 to implement report logging. I will create a table, report execution log, in which you are able to follow who is executing which report and in what way. Furthermore, I'm also going to keep track of how the report was rendered using a custom layout, for example Word or a built-in layout. So logically, the first step is then to create the table report execution log, in which you can see that some fields have been defined. In my example, the report name is a flow field. I'm going to look it up in the object table. The other fields are normal fields. To insert a record in this table, I have defined a function in the table itself, insert records, and this function is a non-local function, so we can call it outside of the table object. When the function is executed, I'm going to make an entry, an insert in this table. I'm going to also use a parameter to store if it's a built-in layout or a custom layout, if it's an RDLC or a Word layout, and so on. It's just an example. You can modify the code or you can use your own type of implementation. The next step is to make sure that when you run a report, the function is going to be called. I am going to use the application management code unit to accomplish this goal. This code unit contains many functions, and one of these functions, if we are going to have a look at it, is going to be executed in the before the onPre-report trigger, and it's the hasCustomLayout function. Here the system checks if the report has a custom layout, yes or no, so it's the ideal place as a hook for our functionality. Here in the function, I inserted a new line of code which is going to call the insert record function in our report execution log table. Then I'm going to pass along the object ID, and I'm also going to use the hasCustomLayout function from the report selection table to pass along the type of layout the report is currently using. This is now going to be inserted into our table, as you can see. To test our functionality, I'm going to run the customer top 10 list, from which I know that it has an RDLC layout. Then via the report layout selection table, I will look for report 1306, which has a Word layout, and I'm also going to execute this report. Now that I've executed these two reports, let's have a look in our execution log table to see what's the result. And as you can see, we have two new records in here. You can see who executed which report and the type of layout, custom, yes, no, or a Word layout, which was used when the report was executed. To wrap it up, these were the steps that I followed. In step 1, I implemented the selection of the paper trace via function in code unit 1. And in step 2, I used the functionality in code unit 1 to implement report logging. So with these steps, I covered the following topics. To learn more, please visit the following resources. Thanks for following this short video to explain how do I manage reports from CAL. This video in the How Do I series for Dynamics NAV is brought to you by Microsoft and Plataan. See you in another one.